Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. Right now it is halftime of the Super Bowl, but instead of Rihanna, I figured it's time to get this week's episode recorded and ready for you Monday morning. Purdue bounced back from its loss to Indiana with a win over Iowa earlier this week, but the good feelings quickly faded after Purdue lost an 8-point lead in the final 4 minutes to suffer their third defeat of the season, this time up in Evanston against Northwestern. So now, I think it's time to take the temperature of this team after they've lost 2 of their last 3 games, with plenty of tough matchups left here in Big Ten play. Is this little downturn a sign of things to come, or is it simply just a blip in the radar? Let's discuss that here on the show today. Real quick, if you don't already, be sure to follow on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. Lots of good stuff there. There's no shortage of stuff to talk about, so follow along there. Come join the conversation, and be sure to subscribe. I'm planning on starting next week, going to 2 episodes per week for the remainder of the season. So we will really start cranking things up. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever it may be, because you won't want to miss anything as we get into the home stretch of the season. So since we talked last, our rare football episode in February, if you missed that, Purdue defeated Iowa 87-73 inside Mackey Arena, a game that Purdue let get close a little bit in the second half, but really, they were in control early and never really lost control of that game for the most part. And you felt pretty good about a 14-point win, but that quickly went away. Purdue led for most of the game against Northwestern. What was it here? Let me pull this up because it was substantial. Purdue led for 34 minutes and 42 seconds on Sunday in Evanston, but things fell apart late in the game. Northwestern went on, I think it was a 12-1 scoring run to flip the game into their favor and get a 6-point win that probably seals Northwestern as an NCAA tournament team. So now Purdue's lost 2 of their last 3. Granted, that drops them to 23-3, still a very strong overall record. I believe they're 12-3 in the Big Ten, so they're in all right shape there. It's not the end of the world, but originally, before Purdue lost this game, I had planned on this really being an NCAA tournament-focused episode, and looking at where Purdue projects as right now as I'm talking here on February 12th at 8:23 p.m. 4 weeks from right now, we will have a bracket. I'll be recording an instant reaction to the Big Ten tournament, probably, depending how that goes for Purdue, and just quick thoughts. So we're quickly nearing the end of the season. I wanted to talk about the NCAA tournament. I'm going to switch how that goes here on the show today because there are some concerns, but, still, as of a little bit earlier, Purdue is still 4th in the net. I think it updates every night, so it's certainly possible they could fall to 5th, but they're not going to fall too far. Again, this is another Quadrant 1 loss. Purdue sits at 9-3 in Quad 1 right now, 4-0 in Quad 2, so the first 2 quadrants where the NCAA really likes to see success, Purdue's at 13-3. That is still very good relative to literally everybody else in college basketball. Only Kansas has more Quad 1 wins than Purdue does. They have 10. Kansas also has 5 losses, so a little bit different resume there. And as you look at where Purdue sits, Indiana and Northwestern, those losses are solidly in Quad 1. Remember, for a true road game, it's teams 1 through 75 in the net. You don't have to worry about Indiana or Northwestern falling outside the top 75. Now that Rutgers game, that goes from, that's 1-30 for a home loss. So I don't know. They have not looked good their last 2 games without Mawot Mag. He's out for the season. That Rutgers loss could certainly fade into quadrant 2. Again, it's not the end of the world if it happens. I don't really know how much one loss means, but Purdue still has a good resume. Purdue has a 2-game lead in the Big Ten. You have Indiana and Northwestern right behind you. They have 5 in the loss column. Purdue has 3. It's a little bit closer, though, than, 9 days ago, before Purdue went to Indiana. The Big Ten looked like it could be wrapped up pretty quickly. Now Purdue's lost 2 of 3, and it doesn't look like the complete shoe-in that it may have even before the Northwestern game if you were assuming Purdue would win that. So is it time to worry? Purdue, for everything they've done throughout the course of the season, throughout these 26 games, look, I know how this goes. It is a very what have you done for me lately type of sport, and it is a very panicky time as we get closer to Selection Sunday, as we get closer to the NCAA tournament, as the most Final Four hungry fan base in America sets their eyes on seeing if the Boilermakers can win 4 games in a row and get to Houston. It is probably time to worry about Purdue turning the ball over. It's becoming a 5-alarm fire with this team. You could look at the Indiana game and you could say, well, Purdue kind of lost its head a little bit early on in that game. They had 11 in the first half, only 5 in the second half. They put it together. Okay, that's all right. You could look at that Iowa game and say, well, Iowa cranked up that pressure because they had a big deficit. They had nothing to lose. Okay, Iowa's a good press team, and they had absolutely nothing to lose. But this against Northwestern, I think that cemented this as a big-time issue with this team. 49 turnovers over the past 3 games, that's a lot. That is a ton of turnovers. That's simply just way too many. Purdue's the best offensive rebounding team in America. They are phenomenal on the offensive glass. Zach Edey's really good. Caleb Furst is good there. Just in terms of guards, Braden Smith and Ethan Morton aren't bad. But when you don't get a shot up, when you turn the ball over, you can't get an offensive rebound. Hell, Purdue's one of the most efficient offenses in America. Let's see where they fell to, or where they sit at KenPom, I guess. They're the 7th most efficient offense in America. That's all down to a decimal point, really. 1.4 points per 100 possessions away from Baylor, who's number 1. So, you're right there with the most efficient offenses in America, but that doesn't matter when you're not shooting the ball. When you're turning it over, it doesn't matter how efficient you are because you're not getting a shot. And on the other side of the court, Purdue's a pretty good half-court defensive team. They're not perfect. They certainly have weaknesses on the defensive side of the basketball, but they're a pretty good team in the half court. But when you turn the ball over and you're letting the other team get runouts, and, Purdue's not built to be a great transition defense team. They're just not. So when you're letting the other team get these runouts based off of live ball turnovers, you're not letting yourself get set. You're just scrambling, trying to prevent a bucket, trying to at least get them to get set in the half court, but that's hard to do. So when you combine all of those, man, it just kills you when you turn it over as much as Purdue does. Not to mention, Purdue's not a very high possession team. If you look at the tempo ratings, Purdue's one of the slowest tempos in the country, 319th. They average 64 possessions per game. That's pretty slow. Purdue is obviously a half-court driven offense, but when you turn the ball over, you're reducing those number of possessions that you can score on, and it becomes a real issue. You put your defense in quite the bind when you turn it over this much. Purdue only scored 58 points against Northwestern. Only Iowa, flipping to that game, only Iowa could force 17 turnovers and still give up 87 points. That's a stat you almost can't believe by just looking at it. But, Purdue scored 58 points against Northwestern. You're not going to win games scoring 58. Purdue's in the last couple of years, I think they've only lost 1 or 2 games scoring more than 70. But when you score 58, you're not going to win many games. It's worth pointing out, turnovers aren't completely inevitable. Even the best teams in the country still turn it over 9-10 times a game. But when Purdue plays through the post as much as it does, you're going to expect some turnovers. That's a lot of bodies in one area when you get it down inside, when they're coming on doubles, when you're putting the ball on the floor for positioning there. All of that. You're going to have some turnovers down low. It's just natural. The ball gets knocked loose, but it's the turnovers out on the perimeter. It's the turnovers trying to get the ball into the post. When teams come to double, Zach Edey's had some turnovers there the last few games that have been really costly, some throwaways. It's the get in the lane and try to pass out and there's nowhere to go type of turnovers. That's where Purdue's really struggling here. And right now, I just think you have to look at these turnovers as Purdue's biggest glaring weakness, because 49 in 3 games is a really unsustainable trend if you want to go on any type of a run in March, or really if you want to hold on to a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. I think a big part of this, undoubtedly, is having younger guards. Braden Smith has had some struggles with turnovers in 3 games in a row now. He did have that big scoring night against Iowa, but that did come with some turnovers. Rough day for him in Evanston, obviously. He did not have his best game. 1 of 7 from the field, 3 turnovers. Not a great day for him. But it's not that this is not an indictment on him. I still fully believe, Purdue is not in this spot at 23-3 without Braden Smith. The level he has played at this year has been remarkably high. I think sometimes he can try to do a little bit too much, and that is very natural for freshmen. I don't know how many of you guys watched Braden Smith play much at Westfield, but he was a very, very aggressive player. Remarkably aggressive. To the point where, I wondered, the turnovers could be a problem as he gets to the Big Ten level early on. And for the most part this year, it really hasn't been. But now, the game's speeding up. The game is absolutely speeding up, and teams are putting pressure on him. And, sometimes he's been excellent, but sometimes the turnovers have come. You just can't always make those jump passes and get into the middle of the lane and try to pass out. It's just different when you're going against the size and the athleticism that exists in the Big Ten. I think both for Braden Smith and for Fletcher Lawyer, fatigue might be setting in a little bit. And that, again, is very natural for freshmen. In the last 10 minutes of both Iowa and Northwestern, where some turnover problems for Braden Smith really set in, I think it looked like he was kind of spent, just physically drained by the end of those games. just not as quick with the first step, a little bit slower in processing things, just exhausted out there. And with Fletcher Lawyer, he's not shot particularly well lately. Teams are getting really, really physical with him. I think that's a big adjustment point. That's not something that happens in high school basketball. This isn't, you're playing 2 games a week against very, very physical opponents. That's not what you do in high school. Playing Iowa and Northwestern in a span of less than 72 hours is a lot different than Fletcher Lawyer going to play Fort Wayne Northrop or Braden Smith going to play Avon. It's a different world. It absolutely is. And again, that's natural for freshmen. But I think really, for the first time all year, those guys have started to look like freshmen lately. And I don't think it's an excuse. I think it might just be a reality. And whether there's something wrong with that or not, I guess is kind of up to you. But, you live by the freshmen, you die by the freshmen sometimes. And right now, over the past 3 games, they've not been great. They had, they combined for 41 points against Iowa, had a really good day there, but sandwiched against 2 performances on the road that were not quite up to that level. 3-point shooting is an area that, if you remember back to December, I remember sitting here in the same spot recording the podcast after the Davidson game when Purdue went like 3 for 25 from 3-point range. And we were wondering, is this 3-point shooting a big problem for Purdue? And then they knocked some down. We haven't talked about it lately. But against Northwestern, Purdue started out 5 for 9 from 3. Mason Gillis knocked down some. Braden Smith got one to fall, I think. And Ethan Morton hit one. After that, Purdue went 0 for 13 to finish 5 for 22 from 3. That is 22.7% and brings Purdue to 33.6% from 3 on the season as a team. Look, Purdue has good 3-point shooters. I think if you look at all of these guys, Fletcher Lawyer is shooting 34%, Caleb First at 33%, Brandon Newman at 32%, David Jenkins at 31%, Ethan Morton at 27%. I think all of those guys are better 3-point shooters than the numbers indicate. I really do. I really think they are better shooters than their numbers are showing. Now, Mason Gillis is sitting up at 40%, Braden Smith at a hair under 42%. So, guys are making some shots, but with Gillis on the heater that he is right now, he's been shooting the ball really well. Braden Smith is much more of a low volume 3-point shooter. He's been really disciplined, averaging right around 3 attempts per game from 3. I think you do have to be a little bit concerned about the 3-point shooting because teams are going to come and double Zach Edey. I think any hope you had of teams just playing Zach Edey one-on-one went out the window with how Michigan State fared that second time. Indiana played him one-on-one some, but they brought some doubles as well. They didn't just go one-on-one the whole game. You're going to see some of that. You're going to see that double. And if Purdue can knock down threes, coaches make a decision. But if Purdue isn't knocking down threes, it gets really difficult. It gets really, really difficult. It's certainly possible that Purdue heats up, that they go knock down some threes this week, and it's not a talking point next weekend. But I think it's worth keeping an eye on because 33% feels awfully low for a team looking to make a run. Look, I don't think that Northwestern loss is a good one. I know, depending on your perspective, you may be inclined to point at officiating for that game. Look, it was certainly physical. there's not much that can be said there. Purdue really got hammered on some plays. Zach Edey got drilled. Caleb Furst did. Braden Smith got hit a lot, but not much got called. That's part of it. Officiating does not cost you a game. Almost never will that happen. Purdue had an 8-point lead at the under 4 timeout. At that point, they only took 2 field goals the rest of the game. In a little over 3.5 minutes, Purdue got 2 shots off. Pretty much the rest of that was all turnovers. That's just brutal. For a team that's been so good down the stretch of games this year, that's really handled big moments quite well, I think that's pretty disappointing. Now, again, it happens. But Boo Buie and Chase Audige, they're good players. It's not a great team. It really isn't. I think you give some real credit to the Northwestern students who made Welsh Ryan as good of an atmosphere as I've ever seen it. That place was rocking on Sunday, and that was a good environment. Purdue did not handle it well. And you look forward, they're going to have more of that. We're 4 weeks away from Selection Sunday. Purdue only goes on the road 2 more times this season. They go to Maryland and they go to Wisconsin. But Maryland's not going to be an easy place to play, and I never think you feel comfortable going to the Kohl Center necessarily. So you don't have to deal with the true hostile environments as much. But man, Purdue did not respond well to that today. That's a tough loss to take. That's a really tough loss to take. As you look at the NCAA tournament kind of landscape here, Purdue has a very real chance to be a number 1 seed for the first time since 1996. And this is a huge deal. This is really big. This data here that I'm about to read is prior to last year's NCAA tournament. So the numbers may be off by a percentage point. But 40% of 1 seeds make the Final Four. If you fall to a 2 seed, that percentage goes down to 20. And if you get below that, that I think a 3 seed's about 10 and everything else is in the low single digits. You really want to be on that 1 line to have the best chance at making the Final Four. The numbers don't lie on this. I'm not worried about Purdue falling off the 2 line, really, but I think it's early, and I don't like to sound too in the moment caught up, but you've got some tough games coming up, and you don't want these losses to stack. The region matters quite a bit this year. The South region, as you probably know, the regional takes place in Louisville. So the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 would take place at the Yum Center in Louisville. If you look at these current bracket projections, and again, I'm saying this Sunday night, so the updates will probably come Monday or Tuesday, but Purdue and Alabama have kind of been those top 2 seeds on most everyone's brackets lately. They both would want the South region. They both would want Louisville if they're the number 1 overall seed. Tennessee's probably out of the number 1 overall conversation after a couple losses. They'd be in that same boat. Houston would probably take Kansas City. But, enough with that. That's a big deal. Getting Louisville, I think most of you remember what happened the last time Purdue played in Louisville. It was like 95% Purdue fans in that building. It was one of the coolest atmospheres I've ever seen. Right now, though, Alabama probably has the inside track to the number 1 overall seed. I think this loss to Northwestern cost Purdue that as of now. Again, we're 4 weeks away from Selection Sunday. This thing could ping pong a million times. But that's a big thing to watch because of where the Midwest Regional is. That's in Kansas City. And if I'm Purdue, I want no part of that knowing that it's possible that Kansas could be there as a 2 seed, maybe a 3 seed, or that Kansas State could be there as anywhere from a 3 through 5 seed. The last thing I would want to do if I'm Purdue is go out to Kansas City and you go into a gym for the Sweet 16 that's got 15,000 Kansas State fans in it. Or you get to the Elite 8 and you're sitting there and it is entirely people yelling Rock Chalk Jayhawk. That turns into a road atmosphere when you're the number 1 seed. You don't want that. So that's going to be a big thing to watch. And again, that's assuming that Purdue can kind of bounce back here and stay in that conversation. On Saturday, the selection committee releases their top 16 teams, so that'll give you a good idea of where Purdue sits. They have a big game with Maryland before that, so you'll have a better feel going into it based on how Maryland goes, but it's going to be interesting to see where exactly Purdue lines up in comparison to those other top teams. With 4 weeks until Selection Sunday, again, Purdue has the most Final Four hungry fan base in America, and rightfully so. It's almost beyond belief that Purdue hasn't been to a Final Four since 1980, but that's reality. And I think you can certainly sense the nerves starting to set in among Purdue fans. So some reasons to be optimistic here. Number one, you have the best player in the country. Zach Edey is still in a great spot to win National Player of the Year. He has been a dominant force all season long. That is a great reason to be optimistic. The defense is vastly improved from last year. Again, Purdue's so much better in the half court on defense. They really play some solid team D. Ethan Morton's a good individual defender. He's probably a better team defender even. They do a nice job of staying connected on defense. You can expose Zach Edey's mobility a little bit, but he's gotten better there too. If you look right now at Purdue's adjusted defensive efficiency, opponent adjusted on KenPom, right now, that number is better than what the 2018 Sweet 16 team had that lost Isaac Haas, as well as the 2019 Elite 8 team. Purdue's better than both of those teams. Obviously, they're infinitely better than last year's team. So that's a big note. They're much better. And when you don't let the other team get out in transition, that team defense in the half court is pretty good. And up until today, and I'm not going to give them a knock just for one instance, I think this is a pretty emotionally mature team. I don't think they're an egotistical team. I don't think they're a chemistry issue team the way last year's team may have been. And I think this team is remarkably competitive, something that last year's team certainly was not. So I think that is a real positive here. They've handled every downturn in games well up until the Northwestern game. And we'll see how they come out against Maryland. But this team has been really competitive, and they've been mature beyond their years. And no matter what happened against Northwestern today, they have still been mature beyond their years. Of course, there are the reasons to be concerned. The turnovers are the big one. But there's inexperience. And I don't just mean the freshman guards. You look at this roster, and Ethan Morton logged some big minutes against Texas last year and did a great job of shutting down Marcus Carr when that game mattered most. But it's not like he's oozing with NCAA tournament experience. Caleb First got into games, but it's not like he was playing big-time minutes in the NCAA tournament last year. He was pretty solidly behind Mason Gillis. Brandon Newman was largely out of the rotation. Has David Jenkins played in an NCAA tournament? Maybe he did at South Dakota State. I'm not positive. It wasn't at UNLV or Utah, so I'm not sure there. Trey Kaufman-Renn obviously has not played an NCAA tournament game, nor have Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. So there's some real inexperience here. Now, sometimes ignorance is bliss, too. It's not the be-all, end-all. And the streaky three-point shooting. You can't have a game where you go 5 for 22 and really expect to move on outside of that first weekend. It all comes back to the turnovers because, in theory, Purdue will get offensive rebounds and put those back, but you got to be better than 5 of 22. You've got to be better than some of the three-point displays Purdue has showed as a team this year. I think that's kind of your concern. I had a really good listener question for this week, a good one to talk about, because today Trey Kaufman-Renn played 5 minutes. And the question is, long-term, does he fit more at the 4 or 5 spot? And I think this is a very expectations versus reality type of thing. And I don't say that in a bad way. I really don't. But just based on what he did at Silver Creek High School, what he was as a prospect, I think he was, I thought he would be a guy who played more of a 4 role at Purdue. Now, Vince Edwards would probably have been a really high-end comparison, but I thought he was someone who could play on the perimeter like that. We've seen none of that so far. He's played mostly at the 5, which, one can presume that's where he's looked the best in practice, and I have no reason to doubt that. But early on in the season, he was shooting some from 3. It did not go particularly well. He still sits 4 of 19 from 3-point range on the season. He hasn't shot one in forever. He doesn't look really comfortable shooting the ball at the free throw line either. On the season there, he is 60%. So, not great. But he's been really good with his back to the basket. He looks comfortable doing that. His best games, which, is worth pointing out, have come against lesser competition. It also came when Zach Edey was sick, and Trey Kaufman-Renn got a lot more minutes. But he showed some real ability in the post. Just today, he had a really nice bucket where he had his back to the basket, goes over his left shoulder, gets a bucket. He showed some real ability there. I think that projects him at the 5 moving forward. Now, he doesn't have the same height that Purdue centers in recent memory have had. He's not a skyscraper like A.J. Hammonds, like Isaac Haas, Matt Harms, Zach Edey. None of those guys. He doesn't have that type of height, but he has some ability in the back to the basket. And just because Purdue's kind of had a giant there for so long doesn't mean you have to. Now, he needs to get stronger. He gets moved around down there quite a bit. He needs to improve his rebounding. Opponents are really physical with him. Borderline fouling him quite a bit. So that's an area of improvement for sure. He needs to shoot free throws better. That's certainly a given, but there are going to be minutes for him at the 5. You look moving forward, next year, Mason Gillis and Caleb First are both back at the 4. Whether Zach Edey is back or not, I don't know. We've discussed this on the podcast. I don't know that I'm really going to go in too much to that. But it's possible he's gone. I have no idea what to expect from Will Berg. Absolutely no idea. The last time I tried to project someone, I thought Zach Edey probably wasn't ready yet as a freshman, and we saw how that went. So I have no idea what to expect. But there are going to be minutes there for Trey Kaufman-Renn. Whether it's at the 4, whether it's at the 5, there will be minutes there. If he's going to play the 4, if that's where, long-term he would slot in, I don't think that's the case, but he's got to get quicker. You saw last year, Caleb Furst was borderline unplayable in some games because of his foot speed on defense. Give him some real credit. He's improved that immensely this year. It can be done, but he has to shoot the 3 ball better as well. That's such a big part of Purdue's offense being as efficient as it is that you have a really skilled post player with 4 guys who can knock down threes around him. That's a really big part of this. Purdue's been good there this year, even if they're not shooting as well. Their offense is still remarkably efficient, but having that is really, really important. So if Trey Kaufman-Renn's going to play at the 4, that's probably the quickest way. And of course, if you can handle the ball well, that's such a big piece of anything playing outside as well. So long story short, I think he probably slots in at the 5, even if that's not what I would have said when he came into Purdue. So up next, it's a big week here. Purdue goes to Maryland Thursday night. That's an early game, 6:30 tip. And then Sunday, they've got a CBS game at home against Ohio State in the afternoon. Maryland is going to be really tough. I think seeing Maryland on the schedule makes that Northwestern loss hurt more. I'm not going to go as far as to say that I think Purdue will lose that game, but it's a really tough one. You saw what Maryland did late to Purdue at home, how physical they are with you. They gave Purdue all they could handle in that second half, and they're a lot better at home than they are on the road. They're kind of one of those teams that really has a big gap in what they do based on the location of the game. Purdue is going to have to play really well. You can't go turn the ball over a bunch there, or you could get blown out. You probably can't shoot so poorly from 3. Now, Zach Edey matches up well with them. They don't have anyone to throw at him, but we'll see what Purdue does. That's a really big game. Keep in mind, too, Maryland was abysmal from 3 in that game at Mackey Arena. I wouldn't expect that to continue when they go to College Park. You have Ohio State on Sunday. They're a train wreck right now. They just got bombed by Michigan State on their home court today. I don't know what's going on there, but there are some real issues. They have some talented players. Bryce Sensabaugh's good. Sean McNeil's good. Bruce Thornton's a nice young guard, but they're a disaster. Justice Sewing's good. They've only won one single game since Fletcher Lawyer hit that game winner against them. Chris Holtman feeling some pressure, no doubt. I think Purdue should feel good about that. But again, they're still a talented team. So, all in all, you need these games. If you don't want the Big Ten race to be a sweat, you need these wins here. Because if you're counting on that Indiana game at Mackey to be a comfortable win, which I've seen a lot of Purdue fans do, I don't know that you've watched much Indiana lately. They just came back up at Michigan yesterday to get a big-time win. They have won, 9 of their last 10 or something like that? They're playing really well. Now, they still have plenty of tough games to go. All games are, but I don't know that you want to count on that one being a W just to win the Big Ten. You need a good week here. Don't make this harder than it has to be. See if you can bounce back. There are reasons to be concerned, don't get me wrong, but there is no season that's just completely smooth sailing all straight through. Purdue's avoided as many issues as you could possibly hope for them to so far. They're at 23-3. They're still in good shape, but it's worth keeping an eye on to see where they're at as we move into the final 4 weeks of the final 3 weeks of the regular season, and then the final 4 weeks before they hear their name called on Selection Sunday. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope the Super Bowl went how you hoped. And as I sit here at halftime, I hope George Karlaftis made a big play. We'll be back next week to talk about all the latest with Purdue basketball. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. Much more content over there. And feel free to tweet me anything that you would like to be discussed on the show. If you aren't subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure to get that done before we start going to 2 episodes a week. Thank you again, guys. And until next time, y'all take care.